For 3 years, I brought coffee to my son's headstone on every birthday. 2 cups, one for me, one I'd pour out on the grass, because that was our thing, him and me, morning coffee before a shift. For 3 years I stood at that stone and told him how much I missed him. Then one quiet Tuesday morning, I asked a cemetery crew to open it up. I wanted to move my boy to rest beside his mother. They lifted the lid, and I looked down into my son's coffin, and my son wasn't in it. I'm 71 years old. I've buried a wife, and I thought I'd buried a boy, and I stood at the edge of that hole with the morning still cool and the birds going like nothing was wrong in the world, and I could not make my mind except what my eyes were telling it. 3 years of coffee poured out on that grass, and I'd been grieving at a hole in the ground that never held my son at all. I turned to the foreman and I asked him one question, the only one that mattered. Who arranged the funeral? Because I hadn't. I'd been flat on my back in a hospital bed that whole week, half in a box myself. Somebody else handled every single piece of it. Somebody who cried, people told me, harder than anyone in that church. My son-in-law, Dominic. But before I tell you how a sick old man got back on his feet, picked up a shovel, and took apart the man who put an empty box in the ground, welcome back to Patriarch's revenge. Settle in. This one's a slow burn worth every minute. Smash that like button and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Say hello to the others down there. This crew always shows up for each other. Subscribe and be one of us so you never miss a story. You found the right place. My name is Silas Hardaway, and I found out my son was alive on a Tuesday morning in a cemetery, with a shovel crew standing around me and my dead wife's grave 20 feet away, waiting for company that was never going to come. Let me say the thing plain, because I had to say it to myself about 40 times before it went all the way in. I opened my son's coffin, and it was empty. Not robbed, not disturbed, empty. The satin lining was clean and smooth. The little pillow they tucked under a man's head was still fluffed like nobody had ever laid on it. There was a canvas sandbag in there, right about where the weight of a chest and shoulders ought to be, and a folded gray blanket, and a couple of bricks down by the foot end to make the balance feel right when 6 men carried it. That's it. That's what I've been talking to for 3 years. 3 years I stood at that headstone on his birthday. 3 years I brought coffee, 2 cups, one for me, one I'd pour out on the grass because that was our thing, him and me, morning coffee before a shift. 3 years I told 6 feet of Missouri clay how much I missed my boy. And the whole time there was a sandbag down there where my son was supposed to be. I'm 71 years old. I have buried a wife I loved for 44 years, and I thought I had buried a son, and I have stood at more gravesides than I care to count. And I want to tell you, standing at the lip of that hole, with the morning still cool and the birds going like nothing was wrong in the world, I have never once in my life felt the floor of reality tilt the way it tilted right then. The crew foreman, a decent kid named Petey with a sunburn on the back of his neck, cleared his throat. "Mr. Hardaway," he said, real gentle, like you talk to a man standing too close to the edge of something. "Sir, you okay?" I didn't answer him. I was looking at that sandbag and doing arithmetic I did not want to do. "Petey," I finally said, and I heard my own voice come out flat and far away like it belonged to somebody standing behind me. "Who signed for this burial, sir?" "The interment, 3 years ago. Somebody signs for it." "Who signed?" He didn't know, of course. Why would he? But I knew. That was the whole trouble. I knew exactly who signed because it wasn't me. I was flat on my back in Mercy General the week they put my son in the ground. Pneumonia that turned into something worse. There was a stretch of 2 days there where the doctors talked to my daughter in low voices out in the hall, and I nearly went into a box of my own. So I didn't plan the funeral. I didn't pick the casket. I didn't stand at the front of that church. Somebody else did all of it. Somebody who handled every single detail with a steady hand and wet eyes. Somebody who cried, people told me afterward, harder than anyone in the building. My son-in-law, Dominic. Let me back up and tell you who I am, because otherwise none of the rest of this is going to land right, and I need it to land right. I ran trucks for 39 years, Hardaway Freight. I started it in 1976 with one rig and $140, and I drove that rig myself, Kansas City to Amarillo and back, over and over, until my spine had a permanent opinion about it. By the time I was done, I had 81 trucks, a dispatch office, and a yard out on the East Corridor big enough you could have landed a small plane on it and had room to turn around. I sold the fleet in 2015. Getting old, tired of the phone ringing at 3 in the morning. But I held on to the land. The dirt. And here's a thing about dirt nobody tells you when you're young and breaking your back on it. Dirt in the wrong place is worthless, and dirt in the right place will make you rich while you sleep. They put a distribution corridor and 2 big fulfillment centers within 3 miles of my old freight yard. And that patch of gravel and weeds I'd bought for pennies became worth more than all 81 trucks ever were. So I've got money. I want to be honest about that because it matters to the story. Not yacht money, not the kind of money that gets your name on a building, but serious money. The kind that makes people do their arithmetic when they look at you and think you're not looking back. My wife Eleanor passed in the spring of 2020. 44 years. I'm not going to talk about that much because I can't, still, but I'll say she was the best person I ever knew and the smartest. And if she'd been alive, and well, none of what I'm about to tell you would have gotten as far as it got. She'd have smelled it in a week. She had a nose for a liar that I've only got about half of. We had 2 kids, Nathan and Rachel. Nathan was my boy, the one in the empty box. And I'll tell you about him as we go, because he deserves more than a paragraph. Rachel's my daughter. Sharp, careful, keeps her cards close, got that from her mother. And 11 years ago, Rachel married a man named Dominic Vale. Now I'm going to tell you about Dominic, and I'm going to try to be fair, because being unfair to a man like Dominic is a way of letting him off the hook. You make him a cartoon, and then nobody has to ask how a smart family let a cartoon in the front door. Dominic was not a cartoon. Dominic was charming. He remembered your coffee order after meeting you once. He remembered the name of your dog, your bad knee, the fishing trip you mentioned in passing 8 months back. He'd grip your hand with both of his and look you dead in the eye and use your first name. Good to see you, Silas. Been thinking about that thing you said. And a lot of people walked away from that handshake feeling 10 feet tall. I never did. And for years I couldn't have told you why. It embarrassed me, honestly. The man was good to my daughter, far as I could see, provided, showed up, said the right things at the right times, and I'd sit at Thanksgiving watching him charm the whole table and feel this low, stubborn hum in my gut that I couldn't explain, felt ashamed of. Turns out my gut was just doing math. My head hadn't caught up to yet. You live to 71, you learn to trust the hum. The hum has saved my life more than once. I just wish to God I had trusted it 3 years sooner. Nathan and Dominic went into business together in 2019. I had mixed feelings, and I kept most of them to myself, which was my mistake, and I own it. The business was logistics, freight brokerage, warehousing, the kind of thing that runs on relationships more than trucks. And Dominic's pitch, which he made to me personally over a steak he paid for, was that Nathan had the family name and the family contacts, and he, Dominic, had the head for the modern side of it, the software and the financing, and together they'd build something. Your name still means something on that corridor, Silas, he told me, both hands around his glass, leaning in. 39 years of people knowing a Hardaway load shows up clean and on time. That's not nothing. That's the whole business, actually. He was right about that. That was the whole business. I just didn't understand yet which part of it he was actually planning to use. Nathan was thrilled. And I want you to understand my son so you understand what this cost. Nathan was not a hard man. He was better than me in the ways that count and worse in the ways that keep you safe. He couldn't lie to save his life. When he was 9, he broke a window with a baseball, and he came and found me in the yard, white as a sheet, and confessed before I'd even noticed the glass. He restored old motorcycles in his garage on weekends, 1970s Triumphs specifically, because he liked things that were broken and honest, and could be made to run again with patience. He married late, no kids yet, and he called his mother every single day of her life right up to the end. That was my son, trusting, steady, constitutionally unable to see a con coming because it would never have occurred to him to run one. You put a man like that into business with a man like Dominic, and you have handed a lamb a business card and called it a partnership. In the spring of 2022, they told me Nathan was gone. Highway wreck out on the interstate, they said. Late at night, single vehicle, and a fire afterward bad enough that the casket had to be closed. I got the call in a hospital bed with a tube in my arm, and I want to tell you that I fell apart, but the truth is I was too sick to even do that properly. I remember Rachel's face over me. I remember Dominic's hand on my shoulder and his voice, thick and broken. I've got everything, Silas. You just get well. I've got all of it. You don't lift a finger. And he did. He got all of it. That's exactly the problem. I came out of that hospital 11 days after they buried my boy. I visited a grave I never saw filled. I grieved a body I never saw. And every instinct that might have asked a hard question at the right moment was flat on its back fighting for air. By the time I was strong enough to think straight, months had gone by, and the grief had set like concrete, and you don't go poking at a healed-over wound like that. You don't, or you're not supposed to. I didn't poke at it for 3 years. Then Eleanor's cemetery sent a letter about the plot beside her coming available, the one we'd always meant to be mine, and I got it into my head, sentimental old fool that I am, that I wanted my boy moved. I wanted Nathan next to his mother. I wanted the 3 of us in a row, the way we'd been at 10,000 dinner tables, so that when I finally laid down, I'd be lying down beside both of them. That's all it was. Grief and love, and an old man wanting his family clothes, even in the ground. That's the decision that dug up the truth. Not detective work, not suspicion, sentiment. If I'd left him where he was, I'd have gone to my own grave talking to a sandbag. Now here's the part where a sensible man calls the police. I want to be honest with you because I promised myself I'd be honest all the way through this. I thought about it. Standing right there at the edge of that hole, my phone was already in my hand. 911 is 3 buttons. I got as far as the first one. And then 39 years of moving freight across state lines started talking to me, the way experience does when you finally shut up and let it. Here's what experience said. You call the law with a story about an empty grave, one of 2 things happens. Either they think you're a confused old widower who dug up his own son and lost the thread, and then you're the story, you're the case, you're the man they're gently steering toward a doctor. Or they believe you, and it becomes an official matter, and an official matter moves at exactly one speed, the speed of paperwork. Reports get filed, files get assigned, somebody gets around to it. And while all that grinds along, whoever emptied that box gets a warning and a running start. Because the second the official machine starts turning, it makes noise, and the guilty hear noise a long way off. I have spent my whole life getting cargo where it needs to go before anybody knows it's late. And I looked down into that empty coffin and I thought, I'm not giving this man a running start, not one step of one. So I did what I did for 39 years. Before I told a living soul my cargo was missing, I found out who had it. I peeled $200 bills off the roll I keep in my truck, and I put them in Petey's sunburned hand, and I said, Son, we've got a records mix-up. Wrong plot flagged. Close this back up nice, and do me a kindness and forget you spent your morning on it. He looked at the money, he looked at me. He looked at the money again, and he decided, like a sensible young man, that he had a terrible memory. Then I drove home, and I did not call Rachel, and I did not call Dominic, and I sat at my kitchen table, Eleanor's kitchen table, from noon until 3 in the morning, not eating, not sleeping, working the only question that actually mattered. The question was not, is my son alive? Somewhere down in the part of me that had been humming for 11 years, I already knew he was. An empty grave with a body that burned too badly to see is not a lost man. It's a magic trick. The question was this: who is my son hiding from, and did he do it to himself, or did somebody do it to him? Because those are very different stories, and they need very different fathers. Now I have to tell you how I found him, because this is where people always expect me to say I found a letter, or a diary, or a confession tucked in a drawer. I didn't. Nathan was too careful for that, and anyway a man who's supposed to be gone doesn't leave letters lying around. What Nathan left, without meaning to, was the one thing he could never stop being, See, when you've owned as much land as I have, you get good at reading county and public records, because that's where people leave fingerprints they don't know about. Utility hookups, water usage, business filings. A living man leaves a wake, even a careful one. The lights come on somewhere, the water runs, somebody signs something. But I couldn't search for Nathan Hardaway. Nathan Hardaway was gone on paper, with a death certificate and everything, and a gone man's name turns up nothing. So I didn't search for my son's name. I searched for my son's soul. The motorcycles. Those 1970s Triumphs. That was the one thing in Nathan's whole life that was purely his. Not the business, not the family name, not anything Dominic ever touched or Rachel ever teased him about. It was his and his alone. And I knew, the way a father knows, but wherever my boy was, and whatever name he was wearing, if he was breathing at all, he had his hands on an engine. And here's the thing about restoring a 50-year-old British motorcycle. You need parts. Specific, rare, hard-to-find parts. And there are maybe 4 suppliers in the entire country who carry vintage Triumph components, and those parts get shipped to a real, physical address, because a carbate float bowl cannot be emailed. So I called them, all 4. And I played a part I am uniquely qualified to play, a doddering old collector with more money than sense, and a shed full of half-finished project bikes, chatty and harmless, and just a little bit deaf, keeping some poor kid on the parts desk on the phone for 20 minutes at a stretch. It took 9 days. 9 days of phone calls and dead ends, and me pretending to fumble for my reading glasses while I fished for a thread. On the 9th day, a fellow at a shop in Pennsylvania, warmed up and talking freely, mentioned a regular. Ships a package north every month. Has for about 2 years. A 74 Bonneville rebuild, going real slow, one part at a time, the way a man does it when money's tight, but the work is the only thing keeping him sane. Shipped to a 2-bay repair shop outside a town called Ashford, 90 miles north of me. Under the name Elleridge. I had to set the phone down for a minute. Elleridge was Eleanor's maiden name, my wife's name, from before she was ever a Hardaway. My son had buried himself alive under his dead mother's name. And do you understand what that meant? It meant he wasn't only hiding. A man who just wants to vanish picks a name out of the air. Nathan picked a name that would mean nothing to anyone hunting him, but everything to the 1 or 2 people on this earth who had loved Eleanor enough to recognize it. He wasn't hiding it from me. He was leaving a door unlocked, for me, in case I ever came looking. And it took me 3 years to walk through it, and I have to live with that. I drove up to Ashford the next morning. Didn't call ahead. You don't call ahead on a thing like this. You don't give a ghost time to decide whether he wants to be seen. 90 miles. I don't think I remember a single one of them. My hands were on the wheel, and my mind was 90 miles up the road, walking into 100 different versions of what I might find. The shop was exactly what the parts kid had described. 2 bays, a rolled-up door, a hand-lettered sign, the smell of oil and cut metal drifting out into the lot. And inside, bent over an engine block with his back to the open door, was a man. I stopped just inside the doorway, and I knew him. I want to try to explain this, and I know I'll fail. I knew my son from the back of his neck. 50 feet away, 3 years gone, bearded and thinner and stooped over a workbench, and something older than Thoth and me stood straight up and said, "That's your boy." I raised that neck. When he was a baby, it fit in the palm of one of my hands, and I used to cradle it in the dark so his head wouldn't loll. You do not forget a thing you learned with your hands before you learned anything with words. I couldn't speak for a second. Then I got it out. "Your mother's tank leaks at the petcock," I said. "If that's the 74, always did, you have to shim the—" He went absolutely still. The kind of still where a man's whole body is listening because his ears don't believe what they just heard. Then Nathan Hardaway turned around. He was thin. He had a beard, gone a little gray at the chin, which about broke me. My boy wasn't old enough to be going gray, except 3 years in a grave will age a man even when he's standing up. And there was something in his face, some hard and watchful thing carved in around the eyes, that hadn't been there before, that I will never fully know the shape of, because there are 3 years of my son's life I wasn't there for, and never will be. He looked at me like I was the ghost, which I suppose was fair. We've been haunting each other for 3 years, "Dad," he said, and the word came aparting the middle. "Dad, no. No, you weren't supposed to find me. Not until it was safe." And I crossed that greasy concrete floor faster than a man with my knees has any business moving. And I took my son by both shoulders, and they were warm, they were real, they were solid under my hands, and I said the only true thing left in me. "Boy," I said, "there was never going to be a headstone on this earth that kept me away from you. Never. Not one made. You hear me?" And my son, 38 years old, put his face down into my shoulder like he was 9 again, and had broken something he couldn't fix, and he shook, and I held him up because his knees had gone, and for a while neither one of us said anything at all. Then I stepped back, and I held him at arm's length so I could look at him, and I said the second thing. "Now, you're going to sit down, and you're going to tell me what Dominic did, from the very start, every piece of it, and you're not going to protect me from a single word, because protecting me is what put you in that ground in the first place, and we are done with that." It took him 4 hours to tell it. I'm going to give it to you the way it finally sat in my head after those 4 hours, because that's the only way it makes sense, but understand it didn't come out clean. It came out in pieces, out of order, with long silences where he'd stop and stare at his own hands, and I let every one of those silences run as long as it needed to. I've learned that the important things come out in the gaps, not the sentences. He made us coffee on a hot plate in the corner. It was terrible. I drank 3 cups. Here's the shape of it. The logistics company was real on top. Underneath, it was something else. Dominic had used exactly the thing he'd pitched me over that stake. My name, my 39 years of a Hardaway load showing up clean, the trust I'd built 1 honest mile at a time, as cover. Cover for moving things that were not supposed to move. Nathan wouldn't tell me all the specifics of what, even then, and I've come to understand he was still protecting me even in that garage, still shaving the edges off so I couldn't be pulled in. Money that wasn't clean. Goods that had no business on a legitimate manifest. Roots that existed on paper as one thing and in reality as another. "I didn't know Dad," he said, and he needed me to believe it. I could see that it was the thing he most needed in the world. For over a year I didn't know. He kept me on the relationship side, shaking hands, being a Hardaway, keeping the old customers happy. He handled operations. I thought operations meant spreadsheets. He laughed, and it was an awful sound. By the time I understood what operations meant, my signature was on everything, everything. I was the president of the company. I'd signed things I never read because he handed them to me across a desk and said, "Routine, just initial here," and I trusted him. "I'm the reason it looks legitimate, Dad. My name is the clean part he hid the dirty part behind." "When did you find out?" I asked him. 2 weeks before the wreck. And there it was. He'd found out. And being Nathan, being constitutionally, hopelessly honest, my boy who confessed to a broken window before anyone saw the glass, he'd gone to Dominic and told him he was going to the authorities. Told him to his face. Gave him the courtesy, God help him, of a warning. And Dominic did the math that men like Dominic always do. A living Nathan who talks is a catastrophe. It's prison. It's the whole thing collapsing. It's everything Dominic built coming down. But a Nathan who's dead on paper is the best thing that could possibly happen to Dominic Vale. Because you can hang every single wrong in that operation around the neck of a man who is not there to say otherwise. A dead partner isn't a loose end. A dead partner is a shield. You put all the weight on the man in the ground, because the man in the ground cannot defend himself, cannot testify, cannot do anything but lie there and take it. But Dominic didn't harm him. And this is the part that told me exactly what kind of animal I was dealing with, colder than that, in a way. He didn't need Nathan gone in the final sense. He needed Nathan gone from the world of the living on paper, which is a different thing. So he made an offer, in a parking lot, at night, with something on the seat between them, not in his hand, just there, which is its own kind of sentence. He said, Nathan stopped, started again. He said he had people. Said it very calm, very reasonable, like he was talking me out of a bad investment. He said, "You disappear right now, tonight, and you stay disappeared, and I leave Rachel alone, and I leave your father alone. Or you go to the police, and before it ever gets to court, something happens to them. Your choice. But you only get to make it once. My son looked at me across that oily little shop. "What was I supposed to do, Dad?" he said very quietly. "He knew where you lived. He was married to my sister. He slept down the hall from her every night. If I ran to the cops, the case takes years, and any night in those years he could reach either one of you. He couldn't finish it. The only way to keep you both breathing was to be a man he'd already won against. A dead man doesn't threaten him. A dead man he doesn't need to touch anybody to control. So I let him make me dead, stage the wreck with a wrecked car and a body that wasn't a body and a coroner he had leverage on. Nathan didn't know the details of how, only that it was done. Nathan drove north with a bag and a fake name and his mother's name for a disguise. And Dominic went home and cried at the funeral and buried a sandbag and spent the next 3 years running the dirty operation with a dead man's signature on every incriminating page, and sending my daughter to bed beside him every single night. I'd have stayed gone, Nathan said. That was the deal. Stay a ghost forever, and everybody I love keeps breathing. I was never going to surface, not for anything. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet and furious all at once. I didn't count on you moving a coffin, Dad, of all the things. I didn't count on you loving Mom enough to want me next to her. No, I said, you didn't, and neither did he. And that right there was the first moment since the cemetery that the cold in my chest turned into something warmer and far more useful. Because Dominic Vale had built his entire kingdom on one assumption, that the man in the ground would stay in the ground, and the old man who loved him was too grief-struck and too far past his prime to ever come looking. He'd bet everything on underestimating a Hardaway. I've been underestimated my whole life. It is the single greatest advantage a man ever gets, and almost nobody knows how to use it. I know how to use it. I've been using it since I was young enough to have something to prove and old enough to keep my mouth shut about it. Now everybody listening expects the next thing I did was drive straight to Dominic's house and put my hands on him. I didn't, and I need you to understand why. The why is the whole difference between revenge that feels good for 10 seconds and revenge that actually lands. A threat you can see coming is a threat that gets away. I'd learned, standing over that empty box, exactly how patient this man was willing to be. 3 years of patience. 3 years of kissing my daughter goodnight, while my son ate granola bars in a rented room 90 miles away. You don't beat a patient man by being loud. You beat him by being more patient, and by making sure that when it finally comes, it comes from 4 directions at once, and there's no door left to run through. So I did 4 things over the next 5 weeks, and the order mattered more than any single one of them, so I'm going to give them to you in order. The first thing was to bring my son all the way back to life, but quietly, and on paper first, where Dominic couldn't hear it. I took Nathan 2 states over, to a lawyer I trusted, and through her, to a federal contact who handled exactly the kind of thing Dominic had been running. And my son gave a full, sworn, recorded statement. Everything. Names, routes, accounts, the parking lot, the offer, all of it. It took 2 days. When it was done, the man they declared dead was alive again, in a sealed federal affidavit that Dominic Vale did not know existed. The shield had a voice now, and the shield was pointed the other way. I sat in the hall outside that room for both of those days. I wasn't allowed in, but I wasn't going to be anywhere else on this earth while my boy did that. The second thing was money. Dominic's whole scheme was a money crime under all the cover, and money leaves tracks even when men don't. I brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet, humorous woman named Ruth who I'd trust with my life, and who looks at a balance sheet the way a hawk looks at a field. I turned her loose on every entity Dominic Vale controlled or touched, and Ruth found something I wasn't even looking for. 3 of Dominic's shell companies were leasing land. My land. The old freight yard on the East Corridor. He'd forged lease agreements, using, it turned out, the same signature he forged on everything, my son's, and in 2 places, mine, to run his operation's physical backbone across the very dirt I'd bought in 1976, and never thought to check on, because who checks on a weed lot they already own? The man had been squatting on my land, in my dead son's name, to run the operation that put my son in the ground. When Ruth laid that across my kitchen table and tapped it once with 1 finger and said, "That's yours, Silas. All 3 of these sit on ground that's yours," I had to go stand out on the porch for a while. because that, right there, was the loaded gun. And he'd handed it to me himself years ago without knowing it. The third thing is the one that actually broke him, and it had nothing to do with police, and it took about 4 minutes of legal work. Every piece of Dominic's operation ran through that corridor. His trucks parked on my gravel. His goods moved across my docks. The whole physical spine of the thing, the part you can't fake with a spreadsheet, the part that needs actual dirt under actual wheels, sat on land that belonged to me. So I terminated the leases, all of them. Legally, cleanly, properly, with the full 60 days' notice the law required, served by a process server on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I want you to picture it, because I've pictured it 1,000 times and it never gets old. A polite young man in a polite shirt walks into Dominic Vale's shiny office, says, "Are you Dominic Vale?" Hands him a fat envelope, says, "You've been served," and walks back out. And inside that envelope is the quiet, boring, bureaucratic end of everything. No shouting. No drama. Just, your trucks have nowhere to sleep in 60 days. Your goods have no dock. The ground you built your whole kingdom on belongs to a confused old man you stopped watching 3 years ago, and he wants his weed lot back. An operation like his, it turns out, still needs a landlord. And the landlord had been right there the whole time, pouring coffee out on his wife's grave. The fourth thing was timing, and timing was everything. I made sure, worked it out to the day, with the lawyers, with the federal people, that Dominic would learn his dead partner was alive at the exact same hour that the federal side came down, and the eviction became real. All 3 blows in one morning, so there was no gap, no warning shot, no 24 hours to move money or run or reach for my daughter. Just a man discovering, all in the same breath, that his shield was alive and talking, that his crimes were laid out in an affidavit and a forensic report, and that his entire operation had, as of that morning, no ground left to stand on. 4 directions at once, no door. That's not shouting at a man across a dinner table. That's checkmate, and you don't get to say check first, or he moves the king. The morning it all came down, Dominic came to my house. I'd known he would. Where else does a drowning man swim but toward the last person he thinks he can still con? And I'd planned for it, because I had one hard thing left to do, and it was the hardest of all of them, and it had nothing to do with Dominic. Rachel was with him. She still didn't know, not the whole of it. She knew something was terribly wrong. You could see it in her, the specific fear of a woman who's just watched her husband's face come apart over the phone and doesn't yet know why. She'd come because he asked her to, or because she was scared, or both. And she looked at me in my doorway with her mother's eyes, confused and frightened, and it just about finished me. "Silas," Dominic said, and he used my first name one more time the way he always had, reaching for the old spell. "Silas, listen to me, whatever you think you've—" "Sit down, Dominic. I just need 5 minutes to explain the—" "Sit down." And he sat. Because there is a voice I have used maybe 4 times in 71 years. I used it on a striking dark hand in 91, and on a man with a knife in Reno, and twice more. And it does not miss, and it does not get argued with, and Dominic Vale had never heard it before, and his body obeyed it before his mind caught up. I turned to my daughter, and I made my own voice as gentle as I've ever made anything. "Rachel," I said, "sweetheart, I need you to be braver in the next 2 minutes than you've ever had to be. Can you do that for your old man? Just hold onto the back of that chair and breathe." She gripped the chair. She didn't understand. How could she? And I walked to the door of my study, and I opened it. And my son, her brother, 3 years in the ground, walked out into the room. I have seen a great many things in 71 years on this earth. I watched my wife die. I have stood at more gravesides than I can count. I have never before or since seen anything like my daughter's face in that moment. It was grief and joy and terror all fighting for the same square inch of a human being all at once. And she made a sound I can't describe. I don't have the words for it. It was the sound a person makes when the world breaks and mends in the same half-second. And then she crossed that room and grabbed her brother and held onto him like she meant to pull him back inside her own body where the dead couldn't get at him again. And over the top of his sister's head, Nathan looked at Dominic Vale, and Dominic looked back at a dead man he had built his entire life on top of, and I watched the blood go out of his face, and I watched him finally understand that there was no version of the next 10 minutes where he walked out of my house the man he'd walked in as. Nathan didn't shout. That's not who my boy is. He just looked at the man who'd put him in a rented room for 3 years, and he said, very quietly, in a voice I'll hear on my deathbed, "Hey, partner, here's where everyone landed. I'll be quick, because the loud part's over, and the quiet part is the part I actually treasure. Dominic is awaiting trial on a stack of charges I don't fully understand and don't need to, because Ruth and a federal prosecutor understand them just fine, and that's what they're for. The affidavit alone might have done it. The forensic report sealed it, and the terminated leases meant that when it all came down, there was simply nowhere for him or his operation to run, no yard, no dock, no dirt. He is not getting out. He wrote me a letter from where they're holding him. 11 pages, in that same smooth hand that forged my son's name. I didn't open it. I burned it in the kitchen sink and ran the tap. I'm 71 years old, and I have a limited number of mornings left, and I will not spend a single one of them reading 11 pages about why Rachel moved into her old bedroom in my house for a good while. She and Nathan sit out on my back porch most evenings now, sometimes talking and sometimes not. Some things you rebuild with words. Some you rebuild just by being in the same air long enough that the body remembers it's safe. She married a monster and she didn't know, and she carries that, and I've told her 100 times it wasn't her fault. She got calmed by a professional, same as the rest of us, same as her honest brother, same as her old man for 11 years of Thanksgivings. She's getting there. That's hers to rebuild at her own speed, and I don't push it. Nathan, my son, who spent 3 years dead so that the rest of us could keep breathing, is fixing motorcycles again. Under his own name, out loud in the daylight. He finished the '74 Bonneville, his mother's bike, put the last piece on it a month after he came home, and one Sunday morning I heard an engine I hadn't heard in 3 years come singing up my driveway, and I walked out onto the porch, and there was my boy on his mother's motorcycle with the sun on him, and I stood there and cried the way I hadn't cried since the day Eleanor left me. I asked him once later why he never found a way to get one word to me, just me. I could have kept a secret. I could have helped. And he looked at me a long while and he said, "Because you'd have come, Dad. That's exactly it. The second you knew you'd have come for me, and he'd have known you knew, and he'd have made you pay for it, or Rachel, to make his point. The only way to keep you above ground was to let you grieve me. That's the truth of it." He looked down at his hands, those grease-stained, honest hands. "It's the worst thing I've ever done to anybody, letting you stand at that stone. And I would do it again tonight, exactly the same, to keep you breathing. That's the part I can't apologize for, because it worked. You're standing here. That's the truest thing my son ever said to me. And I couldn't argue with a word of it because I finally understood. I'd have done the very same in his boots, in a heartbeat, without blinking once. That's where he got it. He got the honesty from his mother. He got that from me. The empty coffins, still out there. I had them fill the hole back in, and I left the stone eating me out of house and home. And I told him the truth, which is the only thing I've got left to give anybody at my age. Because for 3 years, I said, a man came out to that spot and poured coffee on the grass and talked to a sandbag and thought he was talking to his son. And the man who put that sandbag there shook my hand at the funeral and used my first name and cried harder than anybody in the church. I want that stone 3 miles from my house where I can drive out and look at it whenever I start to go soft. So I never again, not once, not for anybody, mistake a smooth handshake and a warm voice and my own first name in a stranger's mouth for the truth. Nathan didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. He just came and stood next to his old man and put his arm around me, and we looked out at the yard together. And behind us in the drive sat a 50-year-old motorcycle that runs like a heartbeat, because a patient man who couldn't lie put it back together one honest piece at a time. I didn't lose my son in that ground. I found out exactly who I was, and exactly who I could trust, The morning I picked up a shovel and dug an empty box out of it. And Dominic Vale, the man who cried hardest at the funeral, the man who bet his whole life that a grieving old man was finished, is going to have a great many years in a very small room to think about the day the old man got better and picked up that shovel and went looking for his boy. He should have trusted his gut about me. I always trusted mine about him. And that's where we'll leave it. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think? If you were in Silas's shoes, standing over an empty coffin with your phone already in your hand, one button pressed, would you have called it in right then? Or done what he did, and found out who had your boy before you told a single soul? And here's the harder one. Nathan let his own father grieve him for 3 years, pour coffee on the grass for a sandbag to keep him breathing. Was it the worst thing a son could ever do to his father, or the bravest? Head down to the comments and let's talk it out. This crew always has the best conversations. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next story.